interface between the environment and Indigenous health with interactions between knowledge systems and ways of knowing, being, and the center of many projects. He has had the privilege of working for and with Indigenous communities across the Arctic for more than 30 years. So without that, I will turn off my camera and let Chris do the introduce some of our speakers.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lisa, and welcome everybody to the panel this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're joining us from, or this evening. As Lisa mentioned, my name's Chris Fergal. I'm calling in from Nogajuanong or Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, the homeland territory of the Miccosukee Anishinaabe here at Trent University, where I'm a professor. And we're joined by three eminent and very special guests today, Dr. Rebecca Major, Dr. Sylvia Moore, and Andrew Ariak. I'll turn it to each of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll start our panel discussion. So if we start off with you, Dr. Major, Rebecca, welcome.
Hi, Tonse, good morning. Rebecca Nitiega-san. So my name is Rebecca, but you can call me Becky. I'm joining you today from Whitehorse, which is the traditional territory of Kwalendon and the Ton Council. I spent most of my life in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I had all my education there, born and raised there, spent a few years living in Ontario as a young person, and then spent a few years recently living in Ontario at the working at the University of Windsor. I'm new to Yukon University. I relocated to Whitehorse in the summer. I'm associated with the UArctic because I have the NVD Research Chair in Northern Governance in the Indigenous Governance Research Program. My background, I am Métis on my mom's side. We are from the historic Northwest Métis, part of the Hudson Bay Fur Trade, and currently a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I used to be in Saskatchewan, where I spent time working as a bureaucrat at the Métis Nation Saskatchewan. I was elected at the Métis Nation Saskatchewan as a local president and then area director before I moved to Ontario. And that's my mom's side. My dad's side, my dad was from Bathurst. He was Mi'kmaq and Acadian. And I spent much of my life, my teen years, living and working with my dad, spending time in the north in the bush with him. All my education's from the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm just happy to be here. So that's who I am and a little bit about me.
Good. Welcome and thank you. And Dr. Moore, Sylvia.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm Sylvia Moore, and before I say anything about it myself, I just want to acknowledge that I'm here in Labrador, and I just want to acknowledge that these are the homelands of the Innu and the Inuit, and I always recognize their ancestral and continued ties to the lands and the waters of this area. So at the current time, I'm interim dean here at the School of Arctic and Subarctic Studies, which is part of the Labrador campus of Memorial University. And I'm also one of the founding faculty members of this campus. My connection to UArctic is that I'm the vice lead of the Verde Network, the Verde Indigenous Education Network. And I'm also a member of the UArctic Thematic Network on Teacher Development, Diversity, and Social Justice. And I work collaboratively with Indigenous communities on their education needs and priorities, particularly in terms of the research that they prioritize around Indigenous education at all levels. So I look forward to this afternoon. I really appreciate being here.
Great. Thank you and welcome, Sylvia. And over to you, Andrew Ariak.
Thank you, Chris. Andrew Ariak, Smart Ice Nunavut Operations Lead, and I look after the Pikitauk North portion of what we do. I've been with Smart Ice for about 9 years now, and we monitor the ice conditions for our local community members so they too can feel safe going out on the ice during our winter season. Also, founding member of the CAVIC, Barriers to Bridges, where researchers and Aboriginals meet together and work cooperatively to engage research in the community.
Excellent. Quite a thank you, Andrew. All right. So the way that our panel will operate this afternoon, we've not asked our panelists to start with a presentation or anything like that. We're just going to jump into discussion led by a number of questions that they've received prior to meeting. And to remind all of our visitors today, or our guests today, as Lisa started off, there is an opportunity as the discussion proceeds for you to enter your own questions into the chat. Those will be fed to the panel, and there will be an opportunity for us to pose those questions to the panel members as well. As people saw from the introduction and the invitation to the panel today, we're here to talk about a very important and a growing in importance and significance issue with regards to circumpolar education, circumpolar research, and circumpolar policy. And that is the issue of honoring Indigenous perspectives respectfully, appropriately, and effectively, and how that's done in different sort of venues and in different ways. With our panelists, we have some really unique and different perspectives, from community research to academia to sort of policy and sort of institutional administration. So we expect that it'll be a really interesting and insightful discussion with the panel today. So we thank everybody for joining us. We're going to jump right in, and I'd like to pose the first question to you, Rebecca, or Becky. Which do you prefer?
Becky is fine.
Becky's good. Okay, Becky. How can researchers ensure that their relationship building efforts aren't just performative, but instead really rooted in genuine respect and reciprocity? We often know in research proposals and grant applications now, there's often the request for a letter of support, and we want to make sure that people aren't sort of going through the motions and just ticking the box. How can researchers ensure that their efforts really are truly respecting those principles of reciprocity and respecting the community in that relationship building exercise?
Well, I think this is a really good question, because we're actually seeing a larger shift in research broadly, where people are bringing in their ideas and understandings of positionality. And I actually think this starts with positionality, because Western, considerations of research think about research as unbiased, that people are coming in without any type of lens. I've had conversations with colleagues about lens and lens use, and they say, well, I don't have that. And I'm like, but actually, yes, you do, because everybody does. And research often thinks about that as a bad thing, but it doesn't need to be a bad thing. In fact, research should be personal. It should be personal for the person who wants to engage in the research, and it should be personal, meaningful for the community also involved in the research. So I think that that's where actually the first step is making it personal. So you're actually creating those real relationships and developing that area. So for me, research really should be co-production. It should be Indigenous community led. It should come from community ideas, and researchers should be there to help support the community and what they want researched, worked on, whatever is at hand. But in that, you need to develop the relationship. So if you don't actually develop those meaningful relationships, it will always stay on that surface level. And when I'm teaching and working with students, I encourage them to work on papers that are tied to their own personal interests, because they're going to enjoy the work better. And for non-community researchers working with Indigenous communities, usually there is some sort of interest that's personal to begin with. So if we acknowledge that and develop those relationships first, then you have better opportunities of real meaningful engagement and having people as part of the process the entire time. This should not be, we need to move away from the way notions consider like duty to consult and the way that we bring people along, and put that aside. That's older ways of doing things. And as we do co-production, it's got to start with that, acknowledging that it's okay to have bias and use that for your own personal growth and understanding why those relationships are important to you.
Excellent. Thank you. I wonder if the other panelists have anything that they would like to add on that question of how individuals can ensure that their efforts aren't purely performative. Sylvia or Andrew, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would just add to add to what Rebecca says, in ensuring that you're working with the community as well about what their research needs and priorities are. So as well as Becky's point around students' personal interests, which I think is huge, but also what is it that the community needs and wants, so that the relationships you build, whether they be research relationships or if those become relationships on different levels as well, you know, personal and professional and so on, that work draws in everyone in a network in terms of the relationships and working together and moving ahead together, I think is really important.
Anything to add there, Andrew?
Yes, I totally echo Rebecca and Sylvia's comments. And community engagement are a very important thing to add to your to-do list when you go to a community. And you can add an extra day or two just to mingle around the community, see what they're up to that building relationship greater. Yes.
So I'll follow up that question with a little bit of a probe. We often think of relationship and developing relationship with community and being rooted in these notions of reciprocity, more specifically in often health and social research that's a little bit more community focused and, let's say, sort of easier to build that human relationship associated with the subject matter of the research. Wondering if we'll start with you, Becky, if you have any thoughts with regards to the importance of that, even for natural and biophysical work, where perhaps individuals think, you know, they really need to just get out to their study site and pass through the community, or there really isn't, let's say, you know, directly a quote unquote human element to the work that they're doing. Wondering your thoughts about the relevance of this issue, even to that work as well.
Yeah, so Western research, going back to sort of my first point with how it's perceived, also compartmentalizes. Whereas instead of looking at things in an integrated approach, going into different spaces, people are there's going to be different relationships with the land and how the land is seen as a relative. So where you're right, we see a lot more of this maybe in the social aspect, and people will say, well, this doesn't have a human element, but it does. If you need to have a relationship with the land, you should be having that same relationship with the people who feel that responsibility and that guardianship for that land and are protectors of that land. It really, you need permission, in my opinion. You know, I've even heard conversations about water samples and things like that and permissions about that. And it's because I think I'm not a fluent Indigenous language speaker. I've taken courses in Cree. And I think about the fact of when a leaf is an animate object while it's still attached to the tree, and how the word changes when it's no longer attached to the tree and it's fallen to the ground, and how there's a relationship in that aspect to land. And so community people are going to have relationships, obviously, with the land. And regardless of the type of research, the local communities and people, that relationship needs to start first. Otherwise, you are trespassing essentially into someone's backyard.
Opportunity for our other panelists to add to that. The importance of this even for natural and biophysical research, and not only health and social research in communities.
I'm happy to go, but I don't think I always have to follow Rebecca. Andrew, I'm very happy if you want to step in with smart ice and make some comments before I do.
You could go ahead.
Okay, then. So just a few thoughts I had as I listened to the question, Chris, as well as your response, Becky. One is the idea of us as humans having relationship with elements of the land, and as human beings and in our research capacities, just as you said, Becky, with the water and the land itself, and also the other life on the land. And I think that that's really important and something that we don't always talk about, but is very, very important in terms of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways. I also think it's important to think about our relationship with knowledge itself. So whether that's social sciences or natural sciences, regardless of what it is, what's our relationship with that knowledge, and how is it that we're playing a role in terms of that knowledge revealing itself and coming into a human realm to be used, and also the ways that knowledge will be used once it's found. So regardless of what area of study we might consider it to fall into, but how is that going to be used, and how's it going to be used in maybe an Indigenous community? How's it going to be used in academia and so on? And how do we play a role as researchers in terms of working with that knowledge and supporting that knowledge, but also it shaping our lives as well? And these are things that we often don't talk about in academia, which I think in terms of working particularly in Indigenous communities, that it's very important that we bring this to the students that we're working with.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew, anything to add on that?
Also being community-based, it's really great. Having the information and data available for the community to share with the community is very important, I feel. And just by listening to the community on what they need in terms of research, and to build that relationship with the community, because each community is closely tied with the land, and they know what all happens each at a certain time of year in their land, and building that trust with the community and the research, I believe is important.
Excellent points. Thank you. Thank you very much, panelists. We're going to move along to the next question. It's a nice segue into the next question. After having spoken about the importance of respect and reciprocity with communities and building those relationships, the next question is, how can organizations, so the how, can organizations and researchers foster long-term reciprocal relationships with communities beyond the scope of just an individual research project? We hear so much about the importance of that long-term relationship and respecting the nature of that relationship over the longer term, as opposed to sort of, you know, the history of so much research that has been sort of fly in, fly out, or helicopter research. There's all of those different terms that people use. And I'll point to you, Sylvia, to start us off with thinking about that question. What are some of the things organizations and researchers can do to foster that long-term reciprocal relationship?
Thank you. And I'd like to go back to Andrew's comment about staying a few extra days and being in community and being with people with no particular agenda. And I would add to that just sitting and having tea with people. I recall when just 2 winters ago, when Memorial University had a grant for researchers to be able to go into communities, not to do research, but to reconnect with communities after much of the shutdown that occurred through the most severe years of the COVID pandemic. And I did go, and I remember being in one community on the north coast of Labrador where someone said to me, "Oh, hi, it's nice to see you here." And when I was in the lineup at the grocery store, and a few days later, I saw the same person in the same store who said to me, "And you're still here." I wasn't doing research. I was there being with people, talking with whomever, standing in the grocery store lineups and so on. I think that that experience and those opportunities had more of an impact on me and my time and the relationships and my connectivity to people on the north coast of Labrador than all the work I had done in the 10 years prior to that. And I had gone into those same communities, but not always for extended periods of time and never without a to-do list in terms of whatever I was working on at the time, even though I was working in response to community and on their priorities. It was still a different way of being in community and being with people. And I think that that's the most impactful teaching that I would want to share in response to that question.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Other panelists, Andrew or Becky, things that you have to add about how researchers and organizations can build that relationship and so show essentially their responsibility to that relationship over the long term?
As a researcher, we don't barge into a community and tell them what they need because of this or because of that. We simply ask the community first if they need us or if they need a type of service from a researcher by listening to the community in terms of what they need regarding research. That should be your hope, to help out the community. Not will it only help out the community, it will help the researchers out too.
Well, thank you. Becky, anything to add there?
Yeah, I just want to comment to both my panel, add to what both my panelists say, because with Sylvia, and that goes back to Andrew's comment too originally, is the idea of showing up. That was the first thing that came to my head was, you know, show up. And when you're in community and you notice people that are willing to show up for you, and that happens in a sustained period of time, you take note, especially if they're there not to take the spotlight, but to be there to support whatever's happening. Maybe it's just because, you know, there's sandbagging that needs to be happening because there's waters that are flooding, or there's a crisis, or you need, you know, we've seen with evacuations. I know in 2015 in northern Saskatchewan, when the north was evacuated, we saw who showed up. Right. And that's part of that building that first piece when we talked about that first question about how do you do this? You go in genuinely. It takes time. They call it drinking tea. You know, and that's how you'd spend those extra days, like Andrew said. And also to speak to the second point that Andrew made is the idea that you ask community what they need. You never presume, even if you're an Indigenous person, you're going into someone else's community, you can't presume based on your own knowledge or baggage or anything that you're bringing in with you that you know. It's better to ask. It's always better to ask. And I know with even some of my own connections in community and things like that, as a researcher, I do the same. I say, look, you know, let me know if there's anything you want to work on. Let me know if there's any grants you want me to apply for. Let me know what I can do to support what direction you want. And that's where I see how we can fill that need. And that's part of that long-term how. You know, instead of going in and saying, I know what you need. No. What do you need? What can I do? And make it a very open question as opposed to, you know, a focused question where you're going to get the answer that you want, because that's not ethical, you know. So if you can keep showing up, do those, be in those spaces and show the support, then people will start to see and be able to assess in community whether or not you are that genuine person that they want to work with, because it's sort of like courting each other. And, you know, within community, we call it checking each other out, right? So it's to make sure that you've got that foundation to begin with, but you got to come in with a good heart to do that too.
Excellent points. Thank you. It relates very nicely, actually, to a question that we received through the chat that I'll sort of weave into our conversation right now. This is an individual that's asking a question related to this issue of sort of maintaining long-term relationship and focus. It's something that I often speak about with my own colleagues and with my graduate students when I say, I'm a researcher because of that relationship with community that works more in fewer communities than less in more communities, essentially. That I have a sort of a longer standing respect and relationship with a few communities, as opposed to spreading yourself thin, as in academia, we're often encouraged to do, work in more locations, for example. The participant's question reads, I'm interested in researching children's mental health. Do you think it's more beneficial to explore the diversity of various Indigenous communities, or to focus on a specific community, such as with Inuit children, before expanding my research project? Do you perhaps believe that generalization has been a significant issue in addressing mental health among children? So they're really asking that question of more experiences with a diversity of communities, or perhaps greater quality and depth of experience in a few communities. I wonder if any of the three of you have a thought on that.
I'll jump in. I think it has to do more with your
Mental
research
health is
question.
important up in the north, and
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
um,
Go ahead, Andrew.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
I think mental health is very important up in the north, and I think it's a great idea to start off small, maybe try a community out first and see how that is like. And yeah, I would totally support that type of project up in the north, because it's difficult to find mental health personnel in the community because they're always changing every 3 months. And some children, they repeat their stories to the mental health personnel every time when they change. But this will be a great project to go through, and you could start by with a community first and see how that likes, and expand.
Excellent. Thank you. And Becky, yeah, you were starting to share something. Go ahead and share your perspectives, please.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with Andrew. Like, I think it has a lot to do with how you approach it, how you're focusing your research question and things like that, because overgeneralizations are problematic. We do know that there are common threads because of colonization, which could be, a foundation to grow it later. But I would start by working on developing a meaningful relationship first, and seeing how that project can align with the community and what the community wants. Otherwise, it's still very top down if you're not approaching it that way.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you very much. Just a reminder to participants and those joining the panel today, we will be moving to a question and answer period in about 15 minutes. So there's a chance for you to ask questions to any of the panelists or to all panelists. You can enter those questions in the chat most easily, and we're developing a queue of those questions that we'll be going through as time permits as well. Moving along, at the center of a lot of that relationship building is this notion of trust. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, Andrew, what's the significance of, or the importance of, trying to build trust, and how could researchers do that in an appropriate, particularly a culturally appropriate way, knowing they may have either assumptions of trust already being there, or they may have their own particular ways that they develop their relationships that perhaps aren't as appropriate in an Arctic Indigenous community sort of cultural context.
Oh boy. The trust with researchers today has improved because in the past, researchers would come to a community They would work in or around the community to work on their masters or their PhDs. And sure, they'll hire a cook or polar bear guard or a guide. But being hands-on with the research itself, that rarely happened in the past. And the researcher would leave with the data and not leave anything behind in the community regarding data. And that has improved today, because I've been encouraging researchers to visit or stay longer in communities and have the information or data available for the community, because building that trust with the community is very important. And once the community trusts the researcher, there'll be more insights of what they should be working on next or what they should improve on their next research project.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew. Sylvia or Becky, anything to add there in your thoughts of how trust can be built in a culturally appropriate way with communities?
I would say just being prepared to be in relationship in the long haul. So that idea of, being in community, being there, as Becky mentioned, when the sandbagging is going on and that sort of thing. That's when people look at you as genuinely concerned about the community and not necessarily there for your own research agenda or for your own career advancement. And I think that those are some of the challenges that we run into, and it takes time to build that kind of trust. So that's what I encourage people to do, is just understand that it's a different process and a different commitment, and it takes a while to do it.
Thank you, Becky.
I would just add, both are amazing answers, but to add to that, I would say, do your best to be very self-aware, because you may not realize that you're coming across as someone who's doing data mining, as we call it. So that self-awareness is really key. And being clear in your, always in your intentions, in the way that you speak. Be willing to be wrong, be willing to apologize if you need. That's important, because it's okay to be wrong as long as you're okay to also be a person willing to apologize and make those corrections, because that's being transparent, and that transparency also goes a long way in being in relation with people. And just, some people will say, oh, well, I do all these things, here's all my fancy words, but they don't realize that what they're projecting, oh, I do this and this and this in honor of reconciliation. It's like, okay, but let's see the actions, right? So you have to make sure that your words are also matching your actions, or people won't trust you.
Excellent. Thank you. We're transitioning towards our Q&A period, because we've now got some questions flowing in. And it's great to see that we've got some questions from folks that have some experience working in community and in Arctic communities, and other individuals that are new young researchers or new graduate students. So I'll pose some of these, and any of the panelists are more than welcome to jump in and respond. So the first one we have: to begin relationships with Northern Territories, and specifically with Inuit, is it more customary to be introduced to the community by a local individual that has a connection with the community, or is it just as acceptable to seek out a connection with the community independently? And maybe as our Inuk panelist, I'll pose that one to you, Andrew, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, if you have somebody in the community who knows community connections, that's worthwhile. but also to present yourself too, because you are planning to come to the community and building that relationship with the community will build that trust in the type of research that you're going for up in the north or in any other community.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next question is from a graduate student who says, I've joined a team of researchers and community members who have a long-standing relationship with each other. I've been wanting and trying to develop relationships with this community, but have been limited by travel delays, research funding, and other logistical challenges. Can you share any unique ways through which I might be able to develop these relationships when being with community in person is not feasible, given my place as a graduate student with limited funds or support from my university or institution? Great question. And wondering perhaps if we pose that to Sylvia or Becky. Being at academic institutions, what would you sort of suggest for your own graduate students or students in that situation?
I think this is both of us sitting here wondering who's going to turn the mic on first. So, so one of the things that I think of when I first hear that question is that for a graduate student, that group of researchers is also a community, and it's an academic community. And how unfortunate that there doesn't seem to be an opportunity for this graduate student to spend time in community, because that's what we've talked about for the last 40 minutes, is developing relationships and being in community. So because I don't know the particular circumstances, then it's harder for me to brainstorm and think that if this person were a graduate student with me, what kind of ideas might we be able to brainstorm and come up with together? I guess some of the things that come to mind without knowing any other details are things such as, are there any connections within the community at all? What are they? And is it possible to do some kind of video conferencing with some of the people there at particular locations or groups within the community to introduce the graduate student and begin to have conversations? So even though they're not face to face, they are, at least you can see one another and have a conversation. So it becomes at least one segue into possibly beginning to build relationships when there is no opportunity to necessarily be there in person. So that's the first idea that comes to mind. Maybe I'll just turn it over to Becky and see what other great ideas she has.
Thanks, Sylvia. Again, not knowing too much about it, but what I could do is I could speak from the approach that I take when I'm confronted with similar situations, because I've got two situations I can actually speak on. So in one, for me as the, PI, I would make it my job to make sure that my grad students are involved, brought to the table in those conversations. So for those that are, the PIs in the room, that's one thing, is to make sure that you are inviting your students to the table to be part of the conversations, create those introductions. I have another, a distance co-op placement recently that I've managed to make a connection with, and the students now assisting from one province to another province. And that was facilitated by doing, online Zoom meetings, just having a tea through online Zoom, to open the door and say, this is the student that can help. But let's sit down, let's talk, let's make these introductions, let's get things going, and making sure that the students feel that they're part of the team, even if they can't be there in person, and find ways to have that meaningful connection. Now, if I was the student, I would ask if there was opportunities to be involved in other ways so I could start to develop connections and feel more connected to the project, to the research, to the community, to feel to get that real involvement. So that's just kind of spitballing two kind of approaches, but that's generally how I handle it. Is I try to bring my students along all the way through the journey, the same way I tried to do the same with the researchers. I mean, research, like people that are participants in my research that are Indigenous community people, like we do it as best we can as co-production, and acknowledge the intelligence and capabilities of the students. They're professionals as well. And it's our responsibility as mentors to be properly supporting that process for our students.
Excellent points. Thank you very much for sharing those perspectives. We've got another question from a participant today that relates to what we were speaking about a little bit earlier of developing relationship with community. It's all about relationship, as we know. And they ask, when speaking of building a relationship with a community, how is this done? What steps should be taken to do this? And I'm often asked the same sort of question by folks perhaps that are new to working with communities, and they almost want a checklist, right? Or a set process. And you don't want to fall into that trap, of course, because every community is different. But I'm wondering if there are some general things or general principles that you typically follow, or that you would recommend newer researchers to follow when trying to build that relationship with the community. Maybe we'll start and see if Sylvia has something to say, then Andrew, then Becky.
Okay, thanks for that question. And I'm actually going to maybe comment about how it is that we approach relationship building with community, and not so much what are the maybe steps within that. So one of the things I think of is Margaret Klovatch's work, and how she talks about relational skills. And I always talk to graduate students about their relational skills as researchers. And some of the things that she talked about was humility, sense of humor, and the whole idea of knowing when to step in and when to step back. So I talk to graduate students about that and say, you as a researcher and as a human being are going into a community with a certain skill set. Much of that is around research, and you'll have lots of other relational skills and so on that you bring as an individual human. So what you're doing is you're going in with a skill set, and the community probably has some sort of research needs and priorities. And how do you begin to interact with people so they come to know who you are, what your interests are, what you're able to bring to a discussion, and what is it you hear them saying? I encourage people to listen more than they speak, and to just be there. I think Becky's point about it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're willing to acknowledge those and apologize, that's all part of the human learning journey. So what is it we're bringing to a circle or a discussion of what the community is saying might need to take place, or what they would like to see of research? And I encourage people to listen, to say that you have a certain skill set you can bring to this. This is what you can offer to do, but it's a very collaborative, we all have something to offer, and knowing when to share that and be willing to enact whatever it is you know how to do, and also listening to how that fits in with what the community is asking for. So rather than say, if you're going to develop a relationship, what are the steps you need to take? I talk more about how is it we're thinking about who we are going into a community and what we're bringing, and more what our mindset and our self-awareness is in that.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew, thoughts on that question?
Just community presence is very important. Of course, there'll be delays or cancellations with the flight, but be sure to communicate back with the community for reasons why there was a delay or a cancellation. You don't want the community to think that researcher forgot about us. I never heard them from them again. But to be sure to contact the community again, the reasons why there was a delay or a cancellation with the research, just by approaching simplest way, by emails or phone calls, and we can even set up Zoom now. It's always a pretty good way to communicate.
Excellent, thank you. Becky?
Yes, I agree with both my colleagues. My first instinct, especially at first when listening with Sylvia, is to sit and listen. I know for myself, when I enter into new spaces, I take time to sit and listen and try not to be the loudest voice in the room. That is helpful. And transparency, like Andrew was saying, being transparent and going back to the accountability piece as well, like those things are really important. Every community is different in how you are going to approach them because of the fact that we are so diverse here in Turtle Island, right? Between, you know, even the people sitting around here right now, we come from very diverse backgrounds. I know when I was elected as a Métis person, I was engaged in different ways, and all those ways can be okay as long as you're, again, something I said earlier, coming to it with a good heart, right? And a good mind, and you're being open, and those pieces to start things off make a big difference. But there isn't this magic checklist of what to do and how to meet people and how to get involved. It's really think about your comfort zone too, because you want to be genuine and authentic when you're approaching people. So if you can find a way to professionally do that in your way, that's probably going to be your best guide, right? Because it's not so much about the actions as it is about the intent.
Excellent. Thank you. We've got some great recommendations from the chat as well. Someone who is an experienced nurse and talking about the importance of having a relationship with a good interpreter translator where language is a barrier, and focusing on sort of terminology and language so that communication is clear, and having a plan about communicating and reaching out in the community. Someone working in the area of mental health and talking a little bit about that, as some of the panelists have mentioned, the importance of just spending time in the community and essentially meeting people where they're at, as opposed to expecting people to meet you where you're at as a researcher, which I found quite insightful. There's a particularly interesting question that I want to pose to the panel as well, that comes in from one of our participants, who says, as an Indigenous researcher in person who often works with non-Indigenous research teams wanting to work in Indigenous research spaces, there's considerable emotional labor as part of the work that non-Indigenous colleagues aren't aware of. What trauma-informed training would you suggest for non-Indigenous researchers to help support Indigenous team members? Or what advice would you give to new Indigenous scholars for self-care who are responsible for bringing Indigenous perspectives into non-Indigenous research teams and environments? A really great question that I thought, as we're sort of coming to starting to approach the end of our time, that I thought I would pose to the panelists. So anybody that would like to jump in on that one, trauma-informed training, or things that Indigenous researchers should be aware of in terms of self-care in engaging in those contexts as well. Becky, go ahead. We'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll get us going. Yeah. This is a good question, because burnout is a real serious issue for Indigenous academics. Boundaries are important. They're scary, especially when we're working in systems that are not designed to keep us, because these institutions are not Indigenous friendly institutions. So it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to say no to certain opportunities because other opportunities can be around. You don't have to say yes to everything, but there's like this, like, you know, the publisher perish kind of ideas that get pushed on us. And there's so many opportunities that come along that are actually just checkbox opportunities. So one of the things that I would recommend when being asked to even be on these, you know, predominantly non-Indigenous research teams is asking right out of the beginning, before engaging in any labor, asking what their labor is going to be, to make sure that they're doing things with care, to make sure they're carrying their load, and what kind of considerations they're taking. I agree, like Margaret Kovacs and those research methods books are great places to offer to our non-Indigenous colleagues as starting points to understand some of the positions, and being very clear. One of the biggest communication pitfalls is not having managed expectations when we enter into relationships. And it's important to have these discussions at the beginning of joining a research team as an Indigenous scholar, so that you know that you're not being tokenized, that you're not going to have to bring in all this labor and put it back on them in a good way, asking, what do they know about trauma-informed approaches? What do they know about barrier-informed approaches? And let them know that they have to catch up. They can go back, they can do their own reading, and they can do their own catch up, because it's not up to the Indigenous scholar to educate the whole team all the time. And that's how you're going to burn out. And that's why those boundaries are important. That's why those initial conversations are important. And even if it seems like everything's good in the beginning and suddenly some red flags come up, it's okay to say, I'm done. It's not going to ruin your career. If you need to step out, you can walk away and try something different. You know, managing relationships is difficult, and academia relationships can be especially trying sometimes, you know, with imposter syndrome and all this other colonial baggage that comes with it. But just try to keep yourself centered and remember, like, for myself, I think of myself as being accountable to my community first before my academic community, because that's where my value really is, in uplifting community voices, and stay true to that. If you feel like you're going down the wrong way, that's it. Just stop, right? You don't have to keep going just because you signed up for something. It's okay to walk away if it's not healthy. But just make sure that you're starting on a good foot, because down the road, these conversations are too hard to have if you don't have them in the beginning.
Great, thank you. Sylvia or Andrew, anything you wanted to add there? Sylvia, go ahead.
Yes, I appreciated everything you had to say, Becky, and I wanted to add to that, just in terms of self-care, that it's important that all of us understand that we need to make sure that we're okay, that we're healthy, grounded, that we have a support system around us. I remember when I first came to Labrador to work in Indigenous education, I was advised to find an elder. So even though I had an elder back home, which is in Mi'kma'ki, Southwest Nova Scotia, I was able to connect with an elder here, and she has just been such a godsend to me in terms of me being able to go to her from time to time, have tea, sometimes talk about what's going on and some not. But yes, there's a high risk of burnout. But I also appreciate your comment, Becky, and I think it's worth repeating that we're not responsible for educating non-Indigenous people and taking that on single-handedly. So find yourself the people you need in your life to replenish your energy, and that includes going out on the land and engaging in your cultural practices and making sure you're okay so that you can continue to work for the things that you wish to work for.
Excellent, thank you. Anything else you wanted? Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, those are great comments, and I also contact the community months before I arrived to that community and ask them who's available, what can I rent while I'm there. And once I get to that community, suddenly sometimes people aren't available anymore, but I still contact them and find out why and understand why they're unable to go to where I am while I'm visiting the community, and get that understanding and ask them maybe next time when you feel more comfortable and when they're ready to approach the research, I'll be happy to train them again on my next community visit.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I believe we're starting to come to the end of our time, if I'm correct, Lisa?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you so much, everybody. That was a wonderful discussion and very enlightening. We have come to the end of our time together. I can't believe how fast that went. I'd really like to sincerely thank you all, Dr. Chris Fergal, Dr. Sylvia Moore, Andrew Ariak, and Dr. Rebecca Major, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. Thanks to all of you for attending and for your great questions. If you've enjoyed today's event, please check out future UArctic webinars and discussions. As I indicated earlier, this has been recorded, so I will be sharing a link in an upcoming email, so keep your eye on your inbox. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again. And if any of you want to say a final word, please feel free, and then I will shut the recording.
I just want to thank everyone.
Yeah, Sylvia, Andrew.
This was a
Marcy.
great panel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent discussion today, everyone. Thank you so much, and keep an eye out for that recording.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining. Thanks. Bye-bye.